she screamed when she saw her newborn Burman puppies hanging in the wind. What happened next changed everything. The rain was lashing the asphalt when she heard the cry, not a bark, not a whimper, but a maternal howl torn in half. On the shoulder of the road stood an emaciated dog, dark, wet, and trembling, with bones protruding beneath her skin. Her eyes darted between the road and a tree, where two tiny puppies hung from white ropes. She leaped again and again, tearing her paws, her desperation ripping through the air. In that instant, I realized that if I didn't intervene, her world would collapse completely. As I drew nearer, the rain struck my face so hard it felt as if the sky itself were trying to stop me. The ground beneath my feet was turning into a viscous mire, and each step required immense effort. But the dog, she never took her eyes off me. Her gaze held everything: pain, fear, hope, and a desperate plea that was impossible to ignore. She stood on trembling legs, still attempting to jump, as though oblivious to her dwindling strength. I saw her impossibly thin body shudder with every movement. She stumbled, fell into the mud, but rose again. Her breathing became ragged, turning into a wheeze, but she did not stop fighting. Approaching the tree, I felt my heart sink deep into my chest. Two tiny bodies, wet, helpless, and motionless. The puppies seemed unreal, as if someone had ruthlessly torn them from the world of the living and suspended them for display. The ropes were thin and white, cutting into their delicate skin. One puppy twitched slightly, a barely perceptible movement, like a breath that had not yet decided whether to remain on this earth. I glanced at the mother. She stood beside me, her eyes fixed on my hands. She didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't push me away, she only whimpered softly, the way a creature does when it can no longer fight alone. I took out a knife and felt my hands tremble treacherously, not from fear, but from responsibility. The chance was minuscule, but there was simply no other way. "It's okay, girl," I whispered, though my voice was lost in the noise of the rain. "We'll do this together." And it was as if she understood. She took a step back, trusting me. From that moment, we were no longer strangers. When I cut the first rope, the puppy fell into my palm, so light it felt as if it barely existed. Warm or cold? I couldn't tell at first. It was too small, too powerless to feel like a real living being. Its tiny body was wet, heavy with rainwater, and its breath, if there was any at all, vanished into the air faster than I could perceive it. I pressed the little one to my chest under my soaked jacket, hoping that at least a little warmth would transfer to it. The mother stood nearby, silent, tense to the point of spasms. She seemed to be holding on by the single desire to see her children alive. Occasionally, she would stretch her neck forward, gently touching my knee with her nose, as if asking, "Is he breathing?" I stroked her head for the first time, gently, cautiously. She didn't flinch. She froze, as if this touch was another chance. I had seen many eyes, human and canine, but never like these. This was the gaze of a creature that had endured too much but had not yet allowed itself to break. The second puppy still hung from the rope, and I knew time was running out. I tucked the first one as deep under my jacket as I could and began to cut the second knot. But it was tighter. The nylon was embedded so deeply into the soft skin that I feared the blade would touch the little one. My hands slipped, the knife shook, and the puppy didn't move. "Please, come on," I whispered through the wind. The mother suddenly let out a low howl. Not loud, almost silent, as if she feared the world would take something from her again. I made another cut. Snap. The small body fell into my hands. Too light, too still. I dropped to my knees in the mud, oblivious to how the wet earth was soaking my pants. I knew I couldn't lose a second. Placing the little one in my palm, I began to gently massage its chest with 2 fingers. It was barely warm, almost cold. I leaned closer, trying to hear anything. A breath, a gasp, a movement. Nothing. The mother paced around me but didn't come closer, as if she understood. Now, all we can do is wait. "Breathe, come on, breathe, little one," I exhaled, leaning in. And suddenly, a slight tremor, faint and barely noticeable, like a weak current. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but no. The puppy's chest fluttered, then again. And then a barely audible sound, not a cry, not a squeak, just air that had finally broken through. The mother cried out, a desperate, hoarse sound, but there was something almost joyful in it. She rushed closer but stopped a millimeter from my hands, as if afraid of causing harm. I carefully extended the little one to her. Allowing her to sniff him, she licked his head again and again, until he let out a slightly more confident sigh. I stood up, holding both puppies under my jacket, pressing them to my chest so they wouldn't lose the last crumbs of warmth. The mother walked beside me, almost touching my leg, not out of fear, but out of trust. Out of that fragile, priceless trust that cannot be bought or won by force. Her steps were uneven and heavy, but she didn't lag for a moment. The walk to the car felt like an eternity. The rain poured down in sheets. The wind lashed my face with icy blows. But I felt only one thing, small movements under my jacket, where moments ago there had been silence. I opened the door and helped the mother into the passenger seat. She immediately lay down, trembling, stretching her muzzle toward my hands. I carefully unfolded my jacket and placed the puppies near her chest. She immediately covered them with her body, as if afraid the world would try to take them away again. The puppies whimpered softly. She sighed the way one does when a piece of their heart has been returned. I turned on the heater and covered the little ones with a towel from the glove compartment. As the air began to warm, the mother was already licking their faces, pressing them close, warming them with her body. I got behind the wheel. My hands were still shaking, but for the first time in a long while, there was no emptiness inside me. "Hang in there, girl," I said quietly, looking at her. "We're on our way. I won't leave you." She raised her eyes to me. The same eyes that, just minutes ago, had been full of despair. Now, life was slowly beginning to appear in them. I started the engine and, for the first time in many years, felt that I wasn't driving into nowhere. I was driving toward a place where hope begins. The road to the shelter stretched on endlessly. The rain seemed to intensify, though perhaps it was just my nerves trembling more than the windshield wipers scraping across the flooded glass. The headlights of my old car barely pierced the wall of water in front of me, but I drove on, as if a fire were smoldering behind me and ahead lay the only chance to save at least a small part of this world. The mother dog, whom I was already mentally calling mine, lay on the seat beside me. She never took her eyes off the puppies, warmed by the air from the heater. At first, her breathing was hoarse and erratic, as if her lungs were about to fail. But after a few minutes, as the temperature in the car rose, her breathing became steadier. She carefully pulled the little ones closer to her belly and covered them with a paw, as if afraid that even the air itself could harm them. I watched her out of the corner of my eye again and again. There was something strange in her gaze, a mixture of disbelief, caution, and gratitude, or perhaps I just wanted to think so. Sometimes I caught myself saying something to her aloud, though I didn't even know if she could hear my words or only perceived the tone. But my tone was sincere. "It's okay, Maya," I repeated over and over, as if to soothe not only her but myself as well. "Just a little further. We'll make it." When the old wooden sign for the shelter finally appeared, I felt a long, heavy exhale escape my chest. The light in the windows flickered dimly, as if the building itself was tired from the long night. I slowed down, turned off the engine, and turned to Maya. She lifted her head. Her eyes no longer held panic. But not yet peace. Something in between, fragile, ready to shatter at any moment. "Let's go, girl, hang on." I carefully took the puppies, wrapped in the towel, holding them close as if I was afraid to lose the warmth we had fought so hard for. Maya tried to stand, but her legs gave way. I knelt and put my hands under her side. She flinched slightly but didn't push me away. And together, literally together, we entered the shelter. The warmth hit my face as the door closed behind us. The air here smelled of medicine, wet towels, and something else. Hope, perhaps. At the threshold appeared Colin, the doctor I had once helped with a fire at the old barn. She recognized me instantly, but the question in her eyes lasted only a second, followed by action. Colin was always someone who saved first and asked questions later. On the table, quickly, she said, already pulling on her gloves. I placed the puppies on the towel she had spread on a metal table, and I sat next to Maya, holding her to keep her from panicking. She licked my hand, not out of despair, but from that same trust that was born there in the rain. Colin worked silently, precisely, almost mechanically, but her eyes remained soft. She checked each puppy's breathing, massaged their tiny chests, warmed them with her hands, and applied a small oxygen mask. All this time, Maya whimpered softly, barely audibly. She would either reach for her babies or press against me, as if I were part of her pack. The first one is stabilizing, Colin finally said, a slight smile touching the corner of her lips. The second needs more time, but there's a chance, and that's already a lot. I exhaled as if the whole world had fallen from my lungs. Only then did I notice that my hands were still shaking, as if I were still standing in that rain. Maya lay down next to the table and began to whine gently, as if calling to her puppies. Colin nodded. Let the mother be close, it's important. Together, we moved the little ones closer to her, and Maya immediately reached out, covering them with her muzzle, almost completely concealing them with her thin body. She was trembling, but there was so much love in every movement that something inside me broke. Tom, Colin knelt beside me, looking at Maya just as I was. Who did this? I shook my head. I don't know, but that person didn't just want to cause pain. This was something else. Too calculated, too cruel. Colin frowned. People like that need to be reported. Someone has to investigate. I clenched my fists. They will. I won't let this go. But at that moment, all my attention returned to the small bodies pressed against their mother. They were breathing, quietly, unevenly, but they were alive. And Maya, she closed her eyes, rested her head on my knee, and sighed so deeply and heavily, as if she had allowed herself to relax for the first time in her life. You're not alone anymore, I told her quietly. I'm here. I won't leave. She opened her eyes, and for the first time, a faint but real light flickered within them. That night, we both felt for the first time that life could still go on, even after the darkest of roads. The night at the shelter dragged on for so long that it seemed time had deliberately slowed down, as if life itself had decided to test our resilience. The rain outside subsided, leaving only occasional drops sliding silently down the glass. Colin had gone to her office, leaving Maya, the puppies, and me in the warm semi-darkness of the treatment room. I sat on the floor, leaning my back against the wall, while Maya lay beside me, pressing her thin flank against mine. Her breathing had become quieter, calmer, but she still flinched occasionally, as if the horror she had endured wouldn't release its grip even in sleep. The puppies slept nearby, covered by a soft towel, and every sound of their faint breathing was a gift to me. Every breath was a victory. Colin peeked into the room closer to dawn. Tom, you should get some rest. I'll stay here. No, I shook my head. I'll stay. I fell silent because my voice trembled. They shouldn't be alone. She nodded, as if she understood without words. Then at least have some tea, she said gently, leaving a thermos and a mug on the table. But I didn't get to touch either the tea or the mug, because a few minutes later, something shifted in the air, so subtly that you wouldn't immediately realize what had happened. Maya lifted her head, her ears tensed. Then, a low, menacing growl. What is it, girl? I leaned in, trying to catch the sound she had heard. And then I smelled it, a sharp, bitter, all too familiar scent that made everything inside me clench, the smell of gasoline. I jumped to my feet. Colin! I yelled. She appeared at the doorway almost instantly, but before she could ask anything, she heard what I heard, a dull metallic click from outside, as if someone was opening or closing a lock. Someone's at the back door, she whispered, her face turning pale. Tom, is it him? I didn't answer. I just knew. Maya was already on her feet, trembling, but ready to defend her children at any cost. Her growl deepened, becoming a low, warning rumble. I carefully moved the puppies under a heat lamp, covered them with a second cloth, and then stood up, trying to figure out where the intruder was. Through a narrow gap between the door and the floor, I saw movement. A shadow, approaching the entrance. Too familiar, too confident. I gripped my folding knife. "Tom, don't." Colin grabbed my elbow. "The police are on their way." "I won't let him in," I said, feeling my heart pound so hard it echoed in my fingertips. At that moment, a metallic creak came from outside, the sound of a door hinge being forced. Maya growled louder. "Hold her," I asked Colin. She knelt beside the dog, stroking her back, trying to keep her from a reckless charge. I walked to the back door. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to be heard over the wind. "Who's there?" A pause, then heavy breathing and a low, raspy voice. "They are mine. Give them back." A chill ran down my spine at those words. "They are not yours," I said evenly. "Get out of here, now." "You don't understand," he hissed. "My dogs have to be strong. I get rid of the weak ones. It's the natural order. The law of nature." I gripped the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You're not nature," I said slowly. "You're a coward hiding behind cruelty." In response, silence. For a second, I thought he had left, but then something stirred in the shadows, and his figure appeared in front of the door, tall, thin, clutching a metal rod. He struck the door, and the wooden frame groaned pitifully. "Go away!" I yelled. "The police are almost here." "You're lying, old man," he laughed hoarsely. And then, something I hadn't expected happened. Maya tore free from Colin's grip, growling so low and fiercely, as if reliving that night on the road. She ran to the door and stood between me and the intruder, ready to die but not to retreat. I felt something inside me break. Not from fear, but from the pain of knowing that this creature, who had survived so much, was again ready to defend. "Maya, back," I pleaded, but she didn't move. Another blow came from outside, and the door began to crack. And then, faintly at first in the distance, but growing louder, a sound that was music to my ears, sirens. The man froze. "Damn it," he exhaled and tried to disappear into the bushes. "Stop!" I shouted, flinging the door open. He lunged to the side, but Maya was faster. She chased after him, not like a beast thirsting for blood, but like a mother protecting her own. I ran out after them. The headlights of a police car cut through the darkness, illuminating blurred silhouettes. The man stumbled and fell into the mud, cursing and trying to crawl away. Maya circled him, low to the ground, growling so fiercely that the earth trembled beneath her paws. The police ran up, grabbed his arms, and pressed his face to the ground. One of the officers turned to Maya. "Good girl, it's okay, calm down." But words couldn't soothe Maya. She was tense with adrenaline, ready to lunge again. I approached, knelt beside her, and placed a hand on her neck. "It's over, Maya, it's over. He won't touch you again, I promise." She turned her head toward me and gently nudged my palm with her nose. In that moment, she had definitively chosen a side. And that side was me. After the man was taken away and the police were taking statements, Colin stood in the doorway of the shelter, holding a towel with 2 sleeping puppies. "Tom," her voice trembled. They were whimpering the whole time, as if they could feel it. I lifted Maya into my arms. She was as light as a shadow, tired and exhausted, but alive and very, very brave. We returned to the warmth of the shelter. Colin laid the puppies next to their mother. Maya lay down as if she was afraid to even blink, lest she lose them again. I looked at her, at the dog who had been through hell and still chose love. "It's all over, girl," I said softly. "You're safe now." And for the first time all night, Maya closed her eyes not from fear, but from peace. The morning after that night arrived quietly, almost surreally calm, as if the world itself had decided to give us a respite. The sky turned a soft, pale light, without a single hint of the previous day's storm. I stood by the shelter window, holding a mug of hot tea but barely feeling its warmth, my thoughts returning to Meyer and the puppies. Colin was asleep in a chair, her head resting on her shoulder, and nearby on a blanket lay Meyer. She held her babies close, as if fearing that at any moment the night would return and take them again. The puppies nursed with faint sounds, but there was already more strength in their weak movements than yesterday. I knelt beside them. "Good morning, girl," I whispered. She opened her eyes, looked at me for a second, then stretched her neck and touched my hand with her nose. Though she could barely get up, her movement carried such a long, hard-won gesture of gratitude that my eyes stung. "You saved them just as much as I did," I said, smiling softly. Meyer sighed gently, as if in agreement. Colin woke up, rubbed her eyes, and smiled wearily. "They are getting stronger. It wasn't all for nothing, Tom." "How are they?" I asked, although I could see for myself. "The first is stable, the second is still weak, but..." She stroked his tiny back with her finger. "He's a fighter." "They both are." We watched this small family victory in silence. It seemed that even the walls of the shelter were warmer than usual. But a knock on the door broke the silence. I flinched, but Colin raised a hand. "It's okay, it's the police officer." I was expecting him. The same officer who had caught the puppy killer stood at the threshold. The man took off his hat and nodded respectfully. "Mr. Callahan, Ms. Hayes," he said, "I wanted to let you know the suspect is in custody." The officer clenched his jaw, choosing his words. He confessed to everything. And other cases, too. A long list. "How many dogs?" I asked quietly. The officer looked away. "Too many." A sad shadow passed through the room, but then the officer's gaze fell on Meyer and her babies, and he smiled. A gentle, almost warm smile. "But these 3 survived, thanks to you." "Thanks to you" resonated deep within me. I'm no hero, just someone who didn't walk by. But sometimes, that's exactly what's needed. When the officer left, silence returned to the shelter. Colin sighed. "Tom, what are your plans now?" I looked at Meyer. She lay tired but calm, her babies pressed against her belly. The puppies stirred, as if drawing the strength to live from her warmth. I didn't have to think for long. "I'm staying," I said. "If you don't mind." Colin smiled, the way a person does when they finally hear the answer they've long been waiting for. "Tom," she said, "I'd be glad. We can always use another pair of hands and a good heart here." I nodded, resting my palm on Meyer's warm fur. "We're a team now," I said quietly. "I'd like this to be our home, for me and for them." Meyer lifted her head slightly and rested it on my knee. And that was enough for me to understand. She had chosen me, just as I had chosen her. The puppies squeaked softly. Their tiny voices filled the room with a small but incredibly important sound. The sound of life, which is so much stronger than the pain that came before it. And I realized a simple thing. Sometimes, fate brings you back to a place where you can be needed and where you can start to live again. A week passed. Warm, quiet, and full of the small miracles you only notice when you stop expecting disaster. The morning sun cast a soft light on the wooden floor of the shelter. The air smelled of fresh hay, medicine, and something new, tranquility. Meyer was already standing confidently on her paws. Her ribs no longer seemed so sharp. Her gait was steadier, and a soft, warm light had appeared in her eyes. The puppies had grown, still small, but now curious. One was constantly trying to climb out of their box, while the other sought his mother's side, as if their whole world was hidden there. I was the first to arrive every morning. Not because I had to, but because I was drawn here, because here, amidst the sounds of breathing and quiet rustles, I felt needed. Colin once said, "You know, Tom, you're recovering right along with them." I didn't answer then. But she was right. Sometimes life gives you a chance to start over, quietly, without grand declarations, simply by placing someone else's fragile, dependent life in your hands. And you realize that this is what it's all about. That morning, As I entered the room with a cup of coffee, Maya slowly walked up to me. Unhurried, without hesitation, she rested her muzzle on my leg and exhaled with calm trust. The puppies squeaked, reaching for her, and for the first time in many years, I laughed. An easy, genuine laugh. "Well, family," I said quietly. "Looks like we're together now." Maya pressed closer, as if confirming my words. Sometimes salvation comes not when you are looking for it, but when you extend a hand to another. And in that moment, it becomes clear, none of us are lost, as long as there are those beside us for whom it is worth moving forward. And I knew for sure, a new life awaited us ahead, and we were walking into it together.